I watched my stepmother's crimson lips curve into a smile as she slid the papers across the mahogany table toward me. The afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford family estate made her diamond bracelet, the one that had belonged to my mother, sparkle with obscene brightness. "Just sign here, Vera," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's really for the best." My half-sister Charlotte leaned back in her leather chair, examining her manicured nails with studied disinterest. My half-brother Marcus stood by the window, arms crossed, watching me with those cold gray eyes that had never held anything but contempt. The papers were a formal removal from the Ashford family trust. After 26 years as an Ashford, 26 years of being my father's legitimate daughter, they were erasing me from the family's financial future. The trust that would distribute hundreds of millions among the Ashford heirs would now skip over me entirely. In my previous life, this moment had destroyed me. I had begged, I had cried, I had thrown the papers back at them and screamed about my rights, about my father's memory, about everything I was owed. It had been the beginning of the end, a 5-year descent into poverty, illness, and ultimately death alone in a county hospital while Charlotte vacationed in Monaco and Marcus closed another billion-dollar deal. But this wasn't my previous life. I died at 31, drowning in medical debt, with no one at my bedside. I woke up at 26, 6 months after my father's death, on the morning of my birthday, a birthday no one in this house would remember or acknowledge. And I woke up with every memory intact, including one crucial piece of information that none of them knew: Grandpa Ashford's secret will. "Of course," I said pleasantly, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen, my father's pen, which Marcus had claimed from Dad's office the day after the funeral. "Where do I sign?" My stepmother's eyes widened slightly. She'd been expecting a fight. Charlotte's head snapped up, nail file forgotten. "You... you're agreeing?" Vanessa, I refused to call her anything maternal, couldn't quite hide her surprise. "Why wouldn't I?" I kept my voice light, almost cheerful. "You've made it clear that I'm not really part of this family. I'm just the daughter from Richard's first marriage, the reminder of the wife he actually loved. Why would I want to be tied to people who've made me miserable for 20 years? The truth of those words hung in the air. Vanessa had the grace to look away. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Charlotte recovered quickly, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Finally showing some sense," Charlotte said. "Honestly, Vera, this is better for everyone. You never fit in anyway." I signed my name with a flourish on each page, not bothering to read what I already knew by heart. Standard legal language removing me from the family trust, absolving me of any claims to the Ashford fortune accumulated through 3 generations of ruthless business dealings, investment properties, and carefully managed portfolios. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly know, was that the family trust was nothing compared to what Grandpa Ashford had really left behind. My grandfather had died when I was 19, 7 years ago. In my previous life, I'd been so focused on gaining approval from Vanessa, so desperate to make my half-siblings accept me, that I'd barely processed my grief. Grandpa had been the only one who truly saw me, who remembered my mother with love instead of resentment, who told me stories about her brilliance and kindness. But I'd been young and stupid and so hungry for Vanessa's acceptance that I'd let them push him out of my life in his final years. This time, I'd done things differently. This time, when Grandpa had called me 6 months before his death, asking me to visit him at his private residence in Martha's Vineyard, the house that legally belonged to him alone, not to the family trust, I'd gone. I'd spent 2 weeks with him, listening to his stories, learning the truth about the Ashford family that no one wanted me to know, and I'd been there when he'd met with his private attorney, Samuel Whitmore, to finalize his personal will. "You're my blood," Grandpa had told me, his weathered hands holding mine. "You're Alice's daughter, the only one who has her heart, her integrity. Richard would have seen it if that woman hadn't poisoned him against his own child." Vanessa had been a secretary when she'd met my father. Young, beautiful, ambitious. She'd gotten pregnant with Charlotte within 3 months, and my father, grieving my mother's death from cancer, lonely, vulnerable, had married her. Marcus had come along a year later. By the time I was 7, Vanessa had convinced my father that I reminded him too much of my dead mother, that keeping me close was preventing him from healing. I'd been sent to boarding schools, summer camps, anywhere but home. The few times I was allowed back, I was made to feel like an intruder in my own house. The trust is for them, Grandpa had said, meaning Vanessa's children. Richard set it up the way she wanted, but everything that's mine, everything I built, everything I saved, that's for you, Vera. You'll understand why I can't tell them. You'll understand why it has to be secret. I'd understood. The Ashford family would tear itself apart if they knew. So we'd planned carefully. The will would be held by Samuel Whitmore to be revealed only upon certain conditions, either my 27th birthday or my removal from the family trust, whichever came first. Grandpa had known his family well. He'd known they'd eventually push me out entirely, and now here I was making it easy for them. There, I said, sliding the papers back across the table. All done. Is there anything else? Vanessa collected the papers as if they might disintegrate, her fingers trembling slightly. No, that's all. You understand that this means you'll need to make your own arrangements? The apartment you're living in is owned by the trust, so I'll be out by the end of the month, I said smoothly. I already had a place lined up, a beautiful pre-war building in the Upper West Side that I'd secured with the money from selling some jewelry my mother had left me. Jewelry that Vanessa didn't know existed because I'd kept it hidden in a safety deposit box. And your position at Ashford Industries, Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice cold and clipped, that will obviously be terminated. In my previous life, this had been the killing blow. I'd worked at Ashford Industries since college graduation, starting in a low-level position despite my MBA from Wharton. While Charlotte had been made vice president of marketing straight out of her mediocre state school degree and Marcus had been groomed for CEO, I'd been shuffled between departments, given meaningless tasks, excluded from important meetings. But I'd clung to it because it was my last connection to my father, to the empire he'd helped build on the foundation Grandpa had laid. I resigned this morning, I said, watching Marcus's face carefully. I sent my letter to HR. You should have it by now. I had the satisfaction of seeing actual shock cross his features. Charlotte sat up straighter, eyes narrowing. You resigned? I got a better offer, I lied smoothly. I hadn't, but I didn't need one. In 3 weeks, when Grandpa's will was revealed, I wouldn't need to work another day in my life if I didn't want to. But I would work because, unlike these parasites, I actually enjoyed building things, creating value, making a difference. Where? Charlotte demanded. I'd rather not say until it's finalized, I said, standing up. If there's nothing else, I should go. I have a lot to pack. I turned to leave, but Vanessa's voice stopped me. Vera, I looked back for just a moment. Something almost like guilt flickered across her face. Almost. This really is for the best, she said quietly. You'll be happier not being connected to all this. What she meant was, you'll be happier not being connected to us, not being a constant reminder that Richard Ashford had a life before Vanessa, a love that she could never measure up to, a daughter from a woman who'd been everything Vanessa could never be. I know, I said truthfully. I really, really know. And I walked out of that house for what I planned to be the last time. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I moved into my new apartment, a sunny 2-bedroom with original hardwood floors and a view of the park. I bought furniture, good furniture, not the designer pieces that filled the Ashford estate, but comfortable, quality pieces that were mine. I reconnected with old friends from college, people I'd lost touch with because Vanessa had made it clear they weren't appropriate connections. I started painting again, something I'd loved as a child but had abandoned when Charlotte had mocked my work so relentlessly I'd stopped trying. And I waited. Samuel Whitmore had called me the day after I'd signed the trust papers. It's done then, he'd said, his voice warm. Your grandfather would be proud. The will reading is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. I've sent notices to all relevant parties. All of them? I'd asked. Everyone mentioned in the will, as required by law. Your stepmother, your half-siblings, various cousins and extended family members, and you. I could imagine their reactions when they'd received the summons. Grandpa Ashford's estate had been settled years ago, or so they'd thought. Everything had gone into the family trust, distributed according to the terms he'd established. What could possibly be left? I'd spent my previous life not knowing the answer to that question. Grandpa Ashford had been brilliant. While my great-grandfather had started Ashford Industries and my father had expanded it, Grandpa had been the one with the truly diverse portfolio. He'd invested in art when no one was paying attention, buying pieces from unknown artists who later became household names. He'd bought land in what were then unfashionable areas that were now among the most expensive real estate in the country. He'd invested in tech startups in the early days, getting in on the ground floor of companies that would later define the industry, and he'd kept it all separate from Ashford Industries, separate from the family trust. His private fortune to do with as he pleased. In my previous life, I died without knowing any of this. The will had been read, I later learned, but I'd been in the hospital, dying, and no one had bothered to tell me. By the time anyone might have tracked me down, I was dead. Vanessa and her children had split Grandpa's private fortune 3 ways, adding billions to their already obscene wealth. They'd used my grandfather's money to expand, to invest, to build their empire even larger. All while I died alone and in debt. Not this time. The day of the will reading dawned clear and cold, a perfect December morning. I dressed carefully, a simple black sheath dress, my mother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd kept hidden, and a cashmere coat. Professional, elegant, understated. The reading was held at Whitmore and Associates, a prestigious law firm in Midtown. I arrived exactly on time, and the receptionist directed me to a large conference room on the 20th floor. I was the last to arrive. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, Charlotte to her right, Marcus to her left. Various cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the other chairs, people I barely knew, people who'd ignored me at every family gathering, who'd made it clear I was an outsider. Every head turned as I entered. "Vera," Vanessa said, surprised. "I didn't think you'd come." "I was invited," I said mildly, taking the only empty seat, at the far end of the table. Furthest from the family, naturally. Samuel Whitmore sat at a smaller table to the side, a large folder in front of him. He was in his 70s with a kind face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He gave me the slightest nod. "Now that everyone is here," he began, "we can begin. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I'm sure you're wondering why you've been called here, given that Jonathan Ashford's estate was settled 7 years ago." "Is there a problem with the trust?" Marcus asked sharply. No problem with the trust," Samuel assured him. "This concerns Mr. Ashford's private will, separate from the family trust." A ripple of confusion went through the room. "Private will?" Vanessa leaned forward on the. "What private will? Everything was settled. Everything went to the trust." "Not everything," Samuel said calmly. Jonathan Ashford's contribution to the family trust was substantial, yes, but he maintained significant private assets throughout his life. Investments, properties, collections, and financial holdings that were never part of Ashford Industries or the family trust. I could see Marcus calculating, his mind racing. Beside him, Charlotte had gone very still. "Those private assets," Samuel continued, "are distributed according to a will that Mr. Ashford executed 6 months before his death. I was the sole witness and executor. Per his instructions, this will was to be revealed either on Vera Ashford's 27th birthday or upon her formal removal from the family trust, whichever occurred first." Every eye in the room turned to me. "What does Vera have to do with any of this?" Charlotte demanded. Samuel opened the folder. "Everything," he said simply. "The will is quite straightforward. I'll read the relevant portion. I, Jonathan Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath all of my private assets in their entirety to my granddaughter, Vera Alice Ashford, daughter of my son Richard Ashford and his wife Alice Ashford. She is the sole beneficiary of my private estate. To my other descendants, I leave my love and my hope that they will learn the value of integrity, hard work, and genuine human connection, values that Vera embodies and that they have yet to discover." The silence was absolute. Then chaos erupted. "That's impossible!" Vanessa shot to her feet. "He couldn't have. There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake," Samuel said, his voice cutting through the noise. "The will is properly executed, witnessed, and filed. It's entirely legal and binding." "How much?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "How much are we talking about?" Samuel looked at me. I nodded slightly. The estate has been appraised, he said. The current value of all assets, including real estate, investment portfolios, art collections, and various other holdings, is approximately $4.7 billion. I watched the number land, watched my stepmother's face go white, watched Charlotte's mouth fall open, watched Marcus's carefully controlled expression crack. $4.7 billion, more than double what was in the family trust. That's not possible, Vanessa whispered. Where did he get that kind of money? How did we not know? Jonathan Ashford was a very private man, Samuel said, and a very clever investor. He made his fortune long before Ashford Industries became what it is today. He chose to keep it separate, and that was his right. This is fraud, Marcus said flatly. She manipulated him. She was always his favorite, always whispering in his ear. I barely saw him. I spoke for the first time, my voice calm. Thanks to all of you. You made sure I was excluded from every family event, every holiday. You made it clear I wasn't welcome in my own family. Then how? Charlotte started. Because he called me, I said simply. 6 months before he died, Grandpa called and asked me to visit him. And I went. We talked. We got to know each other. He told me about my mother, about the woman she was, about how much I reminded him of her. You manipulated a dying old man, Vanessa hissed. He wasn't dying, I corrected. He was in perfect health when he made this will. Isn't that right, Mr. Whitmore? Perfectly sound mind and body, Samuel confirmed. I had him examined by 3 independent doctors as a precaution. There's no ground for contesting this will. We'll see about that, Marcus stood. We have lawyers. Better than Whitmore and Associates? I asked mildly. The firm that's handled more successful estate cases than any other in the state? The firm that's never lost a will challenge? By all means, Marcus, waste your money on lawyers. It won't change anything. I stood as well, smoothing my dress. Mr. Whitmore, I assume we have further business to discuss? Indeed, he said. Perhaps in my private office? Wait, Vanessa's voice cracked. Vera, please, this is insane. You can't possibly think you deserve all of this. Deserve? I turned to look at her fully for the first time. Did Charlotte deserve to be made VP at 23 with no experience? Did Marcus deserve to be handed the CEO position at 26? Did you deserve to take my mother's place, to take my father away from me, to make me feel like an intruder in my own home for 20 years? We're family, she said weakly. No, I said clearly, seeing. You're Richard Ashford's second family. I'm Alice Ashford's daughter, and Grandpa knew the difference. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and just so you know, Grandpa left detailed instructions for his art collection. Every piece is to be loaned to museums, with my mother's name as the dedicator. The Alice Ashford collection will be seen by millions. Her name, her taste, her legacy, it will live on forever. I saw Vanessa flinch. Good, let her be reminded every time she opened an art magazine, every time she attended a gallery opening, that Alice Ashford had been loved, was still loved, would always be loved more than she could ever hope to be. The Martha's Vineyard House, I continued, will be converted to an artist's retreat for women in STEM fields in honor of my mother's work as a research scientist. Again, her name, her legacy. I met Marcus's eyes. And the grandpa's stake in Ashford Industries? Oh yes, he kept a private stake that was never part of the trust. That's now mine. Which makes me the 3rd largest shareholder in the company. Marcus went pale. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? I smiled. I have no intention of being involved in the day-to-day operations. I'll vote my shares through proxy. But any major decision, acquisitions, executive compensation, structural changes, those require shareholder approval. My approval. I had them and they knew it. I could make their lives at Ashford Industries miserable if I wanted to. I could block their initiatives, vote down their proposals, make them answer to me for every decision. Of course, I said lightly, if you're fair, ethical, and honest in your dealings, we won't have any problems. Grandpa's shares come with a seat on the board, after all. I'm sure we'll see plenty of each other at board meetings. Charlotte made a strangled sound. This isn't over, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is, I said gently. It's been over since you made me sign those papers, removing me from the trust. You played right into Grandpa's hands. He knew you'd do it eventually. He knew you'd push me out, prove that you never saw me as family. And he made sure that when you did, I'd be free of you and richer than you could ever imagine. I left them there, stunned and pale, their world crumbling around them. In Samuel's office, I signed what felt like hundreds of documents: transfers, trusts, authorizations. He'd set everything up perfectly. Your grandfather, Samuel said as we finished, was one of the smartest men I ever knew, and he loved you very much. I know, I said, tears finally prickling at my eyes. I know he did. He left you a letter, Samuel said quietly, pulling an envelope from his desk. I was to give this to you after the reading. My hands shook as I took it. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, my name written in Grandpa's spidery handwriting. I opened it carefully. My dearest Vera, if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. They've shown their true colors and you're finally free. I'm sorry I couldn't do this while I was alive. I'm sorry I let them push you away for so many years. I told myself I was being neutral, not taking sides in Richard's family drama, but I was a coward. I should have fought for you the way your mother would have fought. This is my way of fighting for you now. The money, the properties, the investments, these are tools, Vera. Use them to build the life you deserve. Use them to honor your mother's memory. Use them to prove that the quiet, thoughtful girl they dismissed is worth 100 of their loud, grasping ambitions. But more than that, use them to be happy. Your mother was happy doing her research, making discoveries, helping people. Find what makes you happy and do that. Don't let the weight of this fortune change who you are. You have Alice's heart. That's worth more than all the money in the world. Love always, Grandpa. I wiped my eyes, carefully folding the letter. There's one more thing, Samuel said. Your grandfather established a foundation in your mother's name, with you as the director. It's set up to fund research grants for women in STEM fields. The initial endowment is $250 million. I looked up sharply. $250 million? He wanted you to have the power to make a real difference, Samuel said, to carry on your mother's work in your own way. I thought of my mother, brilliant and kind, who'd died when I was 6 years old, who'd loved me fiercely in the short time we had together, who'd been erased from the Ashford family history as if she'd never existed. Not anymore. Thank you, I managed. For everything. For helping Grandpa, for protecting his wishes. It was my honor, Samuel said. Your grandfather was a good man. And you, my dear, are going to do wonderful things. The first thing I did with my inheritance was quit the job I'd lined up. I didn't need to work, but I wanted to. I just wanted to do it on my own terms. I started by establishing the Alice Ashford Foundation properly, hiring a team of experts who shared my vision. Within 3 months, we'd awarded our first round of grants, 50 women researchers, each receiving funding to pursue groundbreaking work in their fields. The press coverage was extensive. The Alice Ashford name appeared in the Times, the Post, the Wall Street Journal. Every article mentioned her work, her brilliance, her tragic early death. Every article reminded the world that Alice Ashford had existed, had mattered, had made a difference. I saw Vanessa at a charity gala 2 months after the will reading. She was wearing an emerald necklace that had once belonged to my mother, one of the pieces she'd claimed after my father's death. She tried to avoid me, but I cornered her by the champagne fountain. Vanessa, I said pleasantly. She turned, her smile brittle. Vera, I didn't expect to see you here. It's a fundraiser for cancer research, I said. In my mother's memory. I'm the primary sponsor. Her smile cracked. Of course you are. That's a beautiful necklace, I continued. My mother wore it to her wedding, didn't she? Vanessa's hand flew to her throat. I. Richard gave it to me. After she died, I said. I've been thinking about my mother's jewelry. The pieces that should have come to me. I'd like them back. They're mine, Vanessa said sharply. Richard gave them to me. Without my consent, I pointed out. I was a child. Those pieces are my inheritance from my mother. Legally, you have no right to them. I let that sink in. I'm prepared to be generous, I said. I'll pay you fair market value for each piece. Or we can go to court, and I can contest every gift my father made to you from my mother's estate while I was a minor. Your choice. She stared at me, hatred burning in her eyes. Fine, she bit out. Yuh. I'll have them sent over. Excellent, I said warmly. Oh, and Vanessa, that dress is beautiful. Valentino, isn't it? I seem to remember Charlotte wearing it last season. The implication was clear. The great Vanessa Ashford, who'd once had unlimited access to the family fortune, was now wearing her daughter's hand-me-downs. I walked away before she could respond. Charlotte reached out 4 months after the will reading. We met for coffee at her suggestion at a trendy place in Soho that she'd probably chosen to make me feel unsophisticated. It didn't work. I'd spent the last 4 months traveling, visiting museums, attending conferences, meeting brilliant people who cared about ideas rather than status. She was waiting when I arrived, perfectly made up, designer, everything. Vera, she said, standing to air kiss both my cheeks. You look different. I did. I'd cut my hair, updated my wardrobe, started carrying myself with the confidence that came from knowing I had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. Thank you, I said, sitting down. You wanted to meet? Charlotte stirred her latte nervously. I wanted to apologize. I raised an eyebrow. For how we treated you, she continued, the words clearly rehearsed. We were wrong. We were cruel. We should have been better. You should have, I agreed. She looked startled, as if she'd expected me to immediately forgive her. I want to make things right, she said. We're sisters, Vera. We should be close. We're half-sisters, I corrected. And we're not close. We never were. We could be, she pressed. Now that things have changed. Ah, there it was. Now that I had money, now that I had power, suddenly Charlotte wanted a relationship. No, I said simply. We couldn't. But, Charlotte, let me be very clear, I leaned forward. I don't forgive you. I don't forgive any of you. You made my childhood miserable. You made my father's last years painful. You tried to erase my mother from existence. You pushed me out of the family, isolated me, made me feel worthless. We were wrong, she said again, tears in her eyes. Fake tears, I was sure. Yes, you were, I agreed. And now you have to live with that. I'm not interested in being your sister. I'm not interested in family dinners or holidays or pretending we have some bond. You made your choice when you signed those papers removing me from the trust. Live with it. I stood to go. You're really going to cut us off completely? Charlotte's voice was sharp now, the fake sweetness gone. You cut me off first, I reminded her. I'm just making it official. Goodbye, Charlotte. Marcus was harder to avoid given my position as a shareholder in Ashford Industries. We saw each other at board meetings where I voted my shares carefully, always asking pointed questions, always making sure the other board members knew I was watching. 6 months after the will reading, Marcus proposed a massive acquisition, a tech company that, in my previous life, had been a spectacular failure that had cost Ashford Industries hundreds of millions. I knew this because I'd lived through it. I'd watched the company implode, taking a chunk of the family fortune with it. When Marcus presented the proposal to the board, I asked a single question. Have you done due diligence on their intellectual property claims? Marcus frowned. Of course, everything checks out. Really? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Because according to my research, 3 of their key patents are currently being challenged in court. If those challenges succeed, the company's primary products become generic overnight. The room went silent. That's. We'll look into that, Marcus said tightly. Please do, I said mildly. I'd hate for Ashford Industries to invest $500 million in a company that's about to lose its competitive advantage. The acquisition was tabled. 3 months later, the patent challenges succeeded, and the tech company's value plummeted by 70%. At the next board meeting, one of the other directors stopped me. That was impressive, he said. The due diligence on that tech company. You saved us a fortune. Just doing my job as a shareholder, I said. Have you ever considered a more active role? He asked. The board could use someone with your analytical skills. I smiled. I'll think about it. Marcus heard about it, of course. He called me that night, his voice tight with fury. You're trying to undermine me. I'm trying to protect my investment, I corrected. If that undermines you, perhaps you should make better decisions. This is my company, he snarled. No, I said calmly, it's Ashford Industries. And I'm an Ashford, Marcus, just like you. He hung up on me. A year after the will reading, I attended the opening of the Alice Ashford Memorial Gallery at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was a permanent exhibition space funded by my donation, showcasing rotating selections from Grandpa's art collection. The opening was a glittering affair, attended by art world luminaries, socialites, and press. My mother's name was everywhere, on the plaques, in the program, in the speeches. I stood in front of a Rothko that Grandpa had bought in the 1960s for a few $1,000s, and that was now worth tens of millions, and I felt my mother's presence. She would have loved this, a voice said beside me. I turned to find an elderly woman, elegant in a simple black dress. I'm sorry, I said. Your mother, the woman smiled. Alice, I worked with her at the Research Institute. We were friends. My heart clenched. You knew my mother? Very well, she said. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Alice and I shared a lab for 3 years. She talked about you constantly, showed me pictures. She loved you so much, Vera. Tears stung my eyes. I was only 6 when she died. She knew she was sick, Dr. Chen said gently. She made all of us promise that we'd look out for you. But then Richard married again so quickly, and that woman, she made it clear we weren't welcome. Vanessa, of course. Alice would be so proud of you, Dr. Chen continued. This foundation, this gallery, your work, you're honoring her perfectly. I'm trying, I managed. She told me once, Dr. Chen said, that she worried about leaving you. Not because she thought you couldn't survive without her, but because she knew how cruel the world could be. She made me promise to tell you something if I ever got the chance. What? That you have her strength, her brilliance, and her heart. And that's enough. That's more than enough. I hugged this stranger who'd known my mother, who'd been pushed away by Vanessa's jealousy, who'd waited 20 years to deliver a message. Thank you, I whispered. 2 years after the will reading, I started my own venture capital firm, focused on funding women-led startups in tech and science. I had the money, the connections, and the knowledge from living through the next 5 years once already. I knew which companies would succeed, which technologies would take off, which founders had the vision to change the world. My first investment was in a biotech startup run by a brilliant researcher who, in my previous life, had struggled to get funding and eventually sold her patents for a fraction of their worth. This time, I gave her the capital she needed. 3 years later, her company would go public in a spectacular IPO. But I already knew that. The press started calling me a genius investor. I was featured in Forbes, Fortune, Bloomberg. The quiet Ashford daughter who'd been written off by her family was now a powerhouse in her own right. I bought a townhouse in the West Village, decorated it with pieces from my mother's collection and new discoveries I made at galleries and auctions. I hosted dinners for artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, people who were building and creating, not just inheriting. I dated occasionally, but I was careful. I'd learned in my previous life how many men were only interested in the Ashford name and fortune. This time, I guarded my heart carefully. At one of my dinners, I met Dr. James Sullivan, a marine biologist working on coral reef restoration. He was passionate, brilliant, and had no idea who I was when we first met. "So, what do?" he asked after we'd spent an hour talking about ocean conservation. "I run a Kyakas case, foundation, and a VC firm," I said. "That's cool," he said, genuinely interested but not impressed. "What kind of companies do you invest in?" It was refreshing. For the first time since inheriting Grandpa's fortune, I was just Vera, not Vera Ashford, billionaire heiress. We dated for 6 months before I told him the truth about my wealth. He took it in stride. "I kind of wondered," he admitted. "Your apartment is really nice, and you seem to travel a lot. But I figured you were just successful at what you do." "I am successful," I said. "The money just makes it easier." "Does it bother you?" he asked. "That people treat you differently when they know?" "It used to," I admitted. "But I've learned who my real friends are. The people who like me for me, not for what I can give them." He kissed me then, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt truly happy. 3 years after the will reading, Vanessa called me. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the jewelry incident, and I'd made it clear I wanted nothing to do with her. But something made me pick up. "Vera," her voice was strained. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said, not promising anything more. "It's Charlotte," she said. "She's in trouble. Her marriage is falling apart, and she's made some bad investments. She's asking to borrow money." In my previous life, Charlotte had married a hedge fund manager who'd cheated on her repeatedly before divorcing her and taking half of everything in the settlement. It seemed history was repeating itself. "And?" I said. "I was hoping maybe you could help her." I laughed, actually laughed. "Why would I do that?" "Because she's your sister," Vanessa said desperately. "No, she's not," I said, shy point. "She made that very clear. You all did." "Vera, please." "Did Charlotte help me when I needed it?" I asked. "When I was struggling, when I was alone, when I had nothing. Did any of you?" Silence. "You made your choices," I said. "All of you. You chose to push me away, to treat me like I was worthless, to erase my mother and take everything she left for me. You chose to remove me from the trust. Live with those choices." "You've become cruel," Vanessa whispered. "No," I corrected. "I've become strong. There's a difference. You mistook kindness for weakness, and when I stopped being kind to people who hurt me, you call it cruelty. But I'm not being cruel, Vanessa. I'm being just." I hung up. James found me on the terrace of our apartment. We'd moved in together 6 months earlier, staring out at the city. "You okay?" he asked, sliding his arms around me. "I am," I said, surprised to find it was true. "I really am." 4 years after the will reading, the Alice Ashford Foundation awarded its 100th grant. We'd funded research that led to breakthroughs in cancer treatment, renewable energy, and quantum computing. My mother's name was associated with innovation, progress, and hope. I stood at the podium at the annual gala, looking out at a room full of brilliant women whose work we'd supported. "My mother died when I was 6 years old," I said. "For years, I thought her legacy died with her. I thought she'd been forgotten, erased, lost to time. But I was wrong. Her legacy lives in every grant we award, every discovery we fund, every woman whose work we support. My mother believed in the power of science, the importance of curiosity, and the potential of women to change the world. This foundation is my way of making sure her beliefs, her legacy, live on forever." The applause was thunderous. In the audience, I saw Dr. Chen smiling through tears. I saw James proud and supportive. I saw the women we'd funded, the lives we'd changed, the future we were building. And I felt my mother's presence, warm and loving, telling me I'd done well. 5 years after the will reading, 5 years after my rebirth, I attended my first board meeting as the new chair of Ashford Industries. Marcus had stepped down 6 months earlier after a scandal involving insider trading that I'd had nothing to do with, but that I certainly hadn't prevented. The board had voted unanimously to offer me the position. I'd accepted. Not because I wanted to run the company, but because I wanted to transform it. I wanted to shift Ashford Industries from pure profit-seeking to sustainable, ethical business practices. I wanted to prove that you could be successful and good, that you could make money and make a difference. Marcus sat in the audience, no longer a board member, just another shareholder. Vanessa was beside him, older now, harder. Charlotte wasn't there. She'd moved to California after her divorce, living off what remained of her trust fund. I met Marcus's eyes as I took my seat at the head of the table. He looked away first. "Let's begin," I said. That evening, I returned to my townhouse to find James cooking dinner, music playing, our dog, a rescue we'd adopted, sleeping on the couch. "How was your first day as chairman?" he asked, kissing me hello. "Powerful," I admitted. "Satisfying, right." He smiled. "I'm proud of you." I looked around our home, filled with art and books, warmth and love, everything I'd never had growing up in the Ashford mansion. "I keep thinking about my previous life," I said quietly, "about how different everything was, how much I suffered, how alone I was." "But you're not alone now," James said. "No," I agreed, "I'm not." I thought about Grandpa, how he'd planned so carefully, how he'd protected me even after death. I thought about my mother, who I barely remembered but whose love I felt every day. I thought about the family that had rejected me and the life I'd built without them. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Not forgiving them? Not having a relationship with your family?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. "They showed me who they were for 20 years. I believed them, and I've built something better, a life based on genuine connection, on shared values, on love that doesn't come with conditions." "You've built an empire," James said. "I've built a legacy," I corrected. "My mother's legacy, my grandfather's legacy, and my own." I pulled out my phone and looked at the photo that was my screensaver, the plaque at the entrance to the Alice Ashford Memorial Gallery, my mother's name in bronze, permanent and proud. In my previous life, I died alone, forgotten, with no one to mourn me. In this life, I'd made sure my mother would never be forgotten. I'd made sure her name would echo through generations. I'd made sure the people who'd tried to erase her would be forced to see her remembered, honored, celebrated. And in doing so, I'd saved myself. The doorbell rang. James went to answer it while I set the table. He returned with a massive bouquet of flowers and an envelope. "These just arrived," he said, reading the card. "They're from the board. Congratulations on your first day." I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from the other board members welcoming me, expressing their excitement about the future of Ashford Industries under my leadership. At the bottom, in different handwriting, was a single line, "Your grandfather would be proud." It was signed by Samuel Whitmore. I felt tears prick my eyes. "You okay?" James asked. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." 6 months later, I stood in the cemetery where my mother and grandfather were buried, side by side in the family plot. It was early morning, mist still clinging to the ground, and I was alone. I placed fresh flowers on both graves, peonies for my mother, her favorite, and white roses for Grandpa. "I did it," I told them quietly. "Everything you wanted, everything you hoped for, I did it." "Mom, your name is everywhere. Your legacy is secure. And Grandpa, I've taken everything you built and made it into something that would make you proud." The wind rustled through the trees, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. "They tried to erase us," I continued. "They tried to make it like Mom never existed, like I didn't belong, like we were mistakes to be corrected. But we won. We're still here, and they're the ones who are forgotten." It was true. In the past 6 months, I'd noticed a shift in how people talked about the Ashford family. They didn't mention Vanessa or Charlotte anymore. They barely mentioned Marcus. Instead, they talked about me, about the foundation, about the changes I was making at Ashford Industries. The Ashford name was becoming synonymous with my work, my values, my vision. Not theirs. I'd taken back my family name and made it mean something good. I wish you could see it, I said. I wish you could see what I've built, who I've become. I wish you could meet James, see our home, attend the foundation galas. But I knew somehow that they could see, that they were proud, that they were at peace. I forgave you, Grandpa, I said, for not fighting harder when I was young. I understand why you didn't, and I'm grateful for what you did do, for the way you made sure I'd be taken care of, that I'd have the power to build my own life. I touched his headstone gently. And Mom, I turned to her grave. I hope I'm making you proud. I hope the foundation, the gallery, the work I'm doing, I hope it honors you the way you deserve. I sat down on the bench between their graves, looking out at the peaceful cemetery. I'm happy, I said. Really, yes. Truly happy. I have love, purpose, success, everything they tried to deny me. And they have nothing but their regrets and their diminishing trust fund. A car pulled up in the distance, and I saw Vanessa get out carrying flowers. She was here to visit Richard's grave on the other side of the cemetery. She saw me and froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the misty cemetery. Two women who'd once lived in the same house, who'd once been connected by marriage and loss, who now had nothing to say to each other. I stood, brushing off my coat. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Grandpa, I said quietly. I'll be back next week. I walked past Vanessa without acknowledging her, back to my car where James waited, reading a book. Ready? He asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Ready, I said. He started the car, and as we drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing, nothing in my past that I needed anymore. Everything I needed was ahead of me. 7 years after the will reading, James and I got married in a small ceremony at the Martha's Vineyard House, the artist's retreat that bore my mother's name. Dr. Chen was there, along with our closest friends, the brilliant minds I'd supported through the foundation, the colleagues who'd become family. Vanessa, Marcus, and Charlotte weren't invited. Samuel Whitmore officiated, and as James slipped the ring on my finger, I felt the weight of both my lives settle into something like contentment. I'd been given a second chance, and I'd used it to build something beautiful. That night, standing on the deck overlooking the ocean, James beside me, I raised a glass to the stars. To Alice Ashford, I said, to Jonathan Ashford, to second chances and sweet revenge. To justice, love, and legacy. James clinked his glass against mine. To my brilliant, beautiful, unstoppable wife. We drank, and the ocean wind carried our laughter out into the night. Somewhere in New York, Vanessa was probably in the Ashford mansion, surrounded by expensive things and empty relationships, wondering where it all went wrong. Marcus was probably in his apartment. He'd sold the penthouse 2 years ago when his divorce settlement came through, planning his next failed business venture. Charlotte was probably in Los Angeles, trying to maintain appearances on a rapidly dwindling trust fund, wondering why no one took her seriously. And I was here with the man I loved in the house that bore my mother's name, having built an empire that meant something. They tried to take everything from me. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift, freedom. Freedom to become who I was always meant to be. Freedom to honor the people who truly loved me. Freedom to build a legacy that would outlast their petty cruelties. I'd let them push me out of the family trust, knowing all along that I'd already been named in Grandpa's secret will. And in doing so, I'd won everything. What are you thinking about? James asked, wrapping his arms around me. How perfect this is, I said honestly. How lucky I am. We both are, he said. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the ocean sang its ancient song, I felt the ghosts of my previous life finally release their hold. I was free. I was loved. I was exactly where I belonged. And they, the family that had rejected me, that had tried to erase me, they were nothing but a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when you choose cruelty over kindness, greed over love, pride over family. The Ashford name would live on, but it would live on through me, through my mother's foundation, through the good I'd build into the world, not through them, never through them again. I smiled into the darkness, feeling the future stretch out before me, bright and limitless. Come on, I said to James, taking his hand. Let's go inside. I want to dance with my husband. And we did, in the house my grandfather had loved, surrounded by art that celebrated my mother's taste, building a life that was entirely, perfectly, triumphantly mine. The revenge was complete. The victory was total. And the best part, they'd done it all to themselves.